today we're interviewing, well, I'm interviewing John Arthur Grant, in particular his alighting number one for six flutes that he wrote in 2018. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Joel. Nice to be here.
Nice to have us. Okay, it's for six flutes, so there's a nest, what I call a nest of flutes. So what are the six nests that you've written for?
A flute ensemble, flute choir, if you like. The parts are for two regular flutes, alto flute, bass flute, contrabass flute, and sub-contrabass.
Right, okay.
So five types of flutes.
Yeah. Well, certainly the director, Peter Sheridan, is into low flutes as opposed to the concert flute and the standard flutes that we can have around the traps. So did you find it challenging to write for those much lower flutes other than the alto and bass that we know about?
Yes, it was quite challenging. Just trying to imagine some of the things that I'd written before hearing them. They're difficult instruments to get a handle on if you don't know them intimately, and also they're very soft too. They're not loud instruments at any time. So that turned out to be one of the problems, because I didn't imagine that there would be multiples of all the instruments except for the very lowest ones. So on the recording, the low flutes don't really come out as well as I could have hoped. But so I'd sort of like to hear it again played just by six musicians rather than a larger ensemble. But never mind. There was some. It was great to hear it in that form, and quite pleased with how Peter directed it and encouraged the students. Quite pleased with how it turned out in that version. Yeah.
Having listened to the piece, although I didn't have access to the score, but having listened to the piece, you do give the opportunity for the low flutes to shine when the others are pulled back or quietened down. So they're not totally submerged under the jungle of the higher pitches there. So did you learn that on the job to give them a bit of a showing, or was it your intention, or was it the mere fact that you knew that they were so silent or quiet that you needed to give them some opportunities?
It was definitely intentional. Yes, I wanted to make them a bit of a focus, and partly because I knew that Peter Sheridan was a fan of is a big fan of low flutes. That was part of the reason. Another reason is that the sub-contrabass flute is hardly ever used because it's very rare. There's not many of them about. There's very few in Australia at all, even. So if you're going to write for it, then feature it a little bit, yeah. So that was quite intentional to try and focus a little bit on the very low ones.
Did you talk to Peter beforehand, knowing what his inclinations are in terms of flutes?
Well, no, I'd not about this piece specifically, but I had a couple of years beforehand. I'd written a piece for solo flute that Peter performed at a Melbourne Composers League performance, and that piece was multiple movements, and he used a different sized flute for different movements. And so I knew Peter from then, and I knew how enthusiastic he is and how inspiring he is for his students and for a lot of people. So no, I didn't talk to him about it at all. I just went off down the path and got some ideas together and started to work with them in the way I do, trying to beat things into shape over a period of time.
Well, I wouldn't have said beat into shape. I think you've moulded it very well into shape in this flute choir to feature all of the only thing I think is missing is a piccolo, but which would have stood out even more. So let's have a look at the piece. The title of it is a lightning. So what's that about?
It's the sense of setting out on a journey of alighting as you're getting on board a mode of transport, and you've been taken somewhere else. So it's a fairly nebulous title, really, and I called it Alighting Number One because I'd like to do more. I'd like to. It would be nice if that was a starting point and it became a whole suite of pieces for flute ensemble. That's a sort of a bit of a hopeful thing that I often do when I'm titling a work, and whether or not that actually happens is another thing, of course. But you never know.
You never know. Okay, so it's this journey, or getting onto a mode of transport, which is a sonic transport in our case for this piece. When we go down that journey, explain your structuring. How did you form the work?
What I've enjoyed working as a very small starting point with a lot of my recent pieces is simply the intervals of a semitone and a minor third. And starting from that, you can go anywhere really, because you put a minor third and a semitone together and you've got a major third, and start stacking them up and harmonically, and come up with lots of interesting harmonies. So I have a melody, a sort of a theme that comes back several times, which is based on a minor third and semitone movements horizontally, and then I've constructed a vertical harmony that also uses minor thirds and minor and major sevenths, which is the inverse of the semitone. So
I think what you've just been saying about this is you start out with this stacking of those intervals. I think you start out with that idea of stacking, which is it has a nice tapestry about it, and then you move into, and here's my theme. I think and then the journey progresses through that stacking and the thematic movement across the ensemble. So it does come up structurally quite well in that case. So is form or structure a really important part of you, or is it mainly at the macro, or are you more of a micro composer?
I started out with those micro things of the intervals, but yes, I do like to spend a bit of time considering the overall structure. It has to be pleasing for me. The whole when looked at as a whole, as well as the little individual elements. So probably more of a macro than a micro.
Okay. I just at the end of it, when you listen to pieces, you always start to think, well, other elements come in when you're a listener, and I found it very suspenseful, almost as though it could be a backdrop to a thriller or a horror film. That's how I came across with listening to that piece. Of course, everybody else will have different opinions to that, but it did come across as very dramatic. Not overly dramatic, but there was moments of drama behind that. I mean, I might be completely wrong here, but were you thinking in that sort of dramatic element behind it? Is it just me being dramatic?
Possibly. I can imagine it being more dramatic and more scary if it was arranged for brass instruments, low brass instruments. Then you could more easily put it into a horror movie, perhaps. The flutes tend to soften things. No, I wasn't thinking of it in terms of a horror movie, really. No, but just more of an interesting journey.
Well, that's just me being into that horror scene in many respects. So this performance that we're going to be hearing after this interview is with Peter Sheridan as the director with the Monash Flute Ensemble at the Church of All Nations in Carlton. It was recorded on the 13th of September 2018. Do enjoy it in a horror or any other way you may wish to want to view, listen to it as well. So thank you, John, for your time.
Thanks, Joel, and thanks, Howard, who is behind the camera there.